All right, welcome back, coders. This is all about VPP02, Viking Programming Principles 2. We're going to start off with some lists. We're going to talk about list elements. We're going to talk about index positions. We'll talk a little bit about how to print list items and how to add and remove items. We'll also talk a little bit about how to sort those items. So let's get right into it. I'm going to start off by opening Replit up. And in Replit, we're going to create just our ooh, okay, hold on a second. Off to a good start. So I'm just going to open up our practice Replit and we can work from here. All right. So first off, what is a list? A list is great because it can hold more entries in it than a single variable normally would. And a list is typically seen with one big thing that stands out. Let's say I wanted to make a student list. I'm just going to call this student list, as you see here. I'm going to instantiate it the same way that we have in the past by using this assignment operator, the single equal sign here. However, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a list by using these little square brackets right here. Anything that has these square brackets around the outside of it is going to refer to a list. And in this case, we're talking about a student list. If I wanted to print out that student list, I could simply do it by typing out print. And then inside the parentheses here in our parameter list, I'm going to type out the same thing that we did before with our variable. All you have to do, you don't have to put it in quotes or anything. It knows that this is the variable name. So I'm just printing out the student list. Right now it's empty. If I wanted to add something, I could do that right here. So Isaiah, you'll be the first one. I'll put you in there. There we go. So if I press run, you'll see that the student list is right here. Oh, hold on a second. Isaiah is not defined. If we have this just as our student list here, I need to put our name in quotes because it is a string. So I need to have this as a string. Otherwise, it was trying to find a variable called Isaiah right here. And so now it is no longer finding it. If I press run, it will print out just that one. So if I wanted to add more to this, like I could put Ty here. I could put Skylee, like so. If I added some entries to this list, you'll see that when it gets instantiated, it already knows that these are separate entries inside that list. Now, I could print out the entire list as you see here. I'm just going to put this here. This is printing entire list. If I wanted to, I could print out just one section of the list. And to do that, I would specify which entry out of the list that I wanted to be shown. So to do that, you put the little square brackets right after the name of the variable or the name of the list here. And right here, I'm going to put in the number that I want my list to show. So if I put 1 here, what entry do you think is going to show that it prints out? Does anybody have a guess? The guess would be very deceptive because in computers, we count from the number 0. So you notice right here, I put print student list, and I'm trying to make it print out the number 1 entry of that array or that list. And what it's printing out is what appears to me to be the second entry. That's because lists start from 0. Very important for you to get this concept, but lists always start from 0. You count up from 0 up to 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I were to ask you, what is the first entry of a list? What number would be the first entry of a list? You would tell me 0. Very important for you to remember this. Lists start at 0. So if I put 0 right here instead of 1, it will actually print out the first entry of it right here, which is Isaiah right here. So this is a very important thing to note. In fact, I'll put a little note of it right here. Note. Lists start at 0, not 1. Very important for you to know that because it will cause a bunch of little off by 1 errors. They typically call them off by 1 errors. If you don't know that lists start at 0, then you might run into some problems when you start dealing with those lists later on. So we're going to start right off the bat by telling you lists start. The 0th entry of a list is the first entry of a list. All right, so this is how we can print out a certain part of our list. If I wanted to print out a different part of that list, I could do that right here. Something that's important for you to know also as a programmer, when I start typing something in, you're going to notice that the AutoFillIn shows up down here. These are like some possible, the computer's trying to think what it is you're trying to type out or what you're beginning to type out. If you see what you want here, you can press tab or you can press down, up or down arrows to be able to choose what it would fill in. When I press tab, it's going to fill in the rest of the entry right here. So if I do the same thing right here, if I start typing in the name of a variable like student list, you'll notice that it starts to fill that in for me. So I don't have to type the entire thing of student list. I could just press the tab key once I have this as the top entry, and it'll fill that in for me. A lot of times when you're programming, you want to make it as efficient as possible. Move your hands the least amount of times to make the most of your output show up. So using that tab, that intelligent delimiter, it will really help you to find what you're wanting to type out without you having to type a whole lot. So here I have printing out the first, second, and third entry of the list. If I were to run this, first it's going to type out all the entries. And you'll notice that when I type out all of the entries, it also includes the little sideways, the little square brackets on the end of your list. If I have it print out just each entry individually, then you'll notice that it types them out without any quotes or anything around them or any square brackets. So very important for you to know that lists start at 0, not 1. It's very important. Most programming languages are this way, and you will sometimes see flame wars on the internet between programmers who will insist that most languages just start at 0 and that other languages are wrong. There's just, in Python it starts at 0. There are some languages where it starts at 1, so you can imagine this would cause some difficulties with programmers. All right, so let's talk about adding elements and removing elements to a list now. So if we want to modify something in a list, it's pretty easy to do. All I'd have to do is type in the name of the list item, like if I put student list 0, if I wanted to change the first item in the list, I could simply do that by stating which item I want to change, and then putting the assignment operator or equals, and then I can type out the string that I want. So I'm going to change Isaiah. I'm going to take Isaiah out of there and put Stanley in there. There we go. Just so you know, Stanley is that puppet that's over there on the NAT cabinet. He's got some glasses and a VR headset thing over there. So that's Stanley. Now if I run this, you'll see that the student list is 0 right here. When it starts printing out this code up here, the student list 0 is Isaiah. But if I wanted to print out student list 0 here, you'll see that it will have changed at this point right here. When it reaches code 11, now after it goes past this point, student list 0 is going to be Stanley. So you'll notice that it prints out everything from the top to bottom here correctly. Once it gets to this point, once it passes that point, then it begins to write student list 0 here. So you can see that I've changed the 0 item right here. So that's how we can change it directly. There are some other ways that we can do this too. We can actually add items to a list. To add an item to a list, all you have to do is use the append function. So we learned before that you can basically specify functions to work on a specific variable, and the same thing is true on lists. If we want, we can take our list, like we can take our student list, and I can use the dot, I can put a period, and now I can run a function on that list. And you'll notice a whole bunch of them pop up here. If I just put that dot here, it says I have a whole bunch of different things that I could do, that I could add to this list. It even knows that it's a list, so it's only going to list the things that could be used on a list. So what I'm going to do first is use this append command. The append command allows you to add to a list. So what I put is I put parentheses after this dot append, and inside this parentheses list I can add something. So I'm just going to put a new person in here. Let's see. I'll put, is Dom here today? No, Dominic. All right, I'll put Rosa in there. So I'll put Rosa. And now if I print out that entire list again, you'll see that at this point it appends Rosa. So here we go all the way down to the end. And you can see that at this point it has changed to where Stanley is the first name in the list. And I've appended the name Rosa to the end, so you can see that it added that at the end. So this is how you can add to a list. Student list, or the name of the list that you want to append or add to, then period, and then the command append to be able to add to the end of it. So that's how you add to a list. Pretty easy to do. You can also take away things from a list, or actually let's insert something in the list first. So if we want to insert items in a list, that is, I don't want to just put it on the end. I want to actually go in and put it in the middle of my list somewhere. Now, I could change the number of a list, but if you have a bunch of entries already in a list, like let's say you had a mailing list and you wanted to make it to where this mailing list would send out an email to everybody every month or something like that, you might not want to just replace willy-nilly things into a list. You might want to just slip some new entries in there. And to do that, we're going to use a insert command. So it's very similar to what you see here with append. It would just be student list dot insert. Now what you're going to do with insert is you get to tell the computer what the number is going to be, or the index. Whenever an item is referred to, it's going to be referred to as an index number inside of a list. So the index is what number that particular item lives in. So if I wanted to insert something in the second position, I would put 1, which is the second item in the entry list. You can think of that because 0 is the first entry. So I want to put something in as the second entry here. Then I'm going to put a comma, and the second parameter inside of this list is what you would put in. So I'm going to put Christopher in here. There we go. So if I'm inserting that item into a list, we'll see that it actually slides that entry in and it moves everything else over. I'm just going to make it print out the student list again, and we'll see what it does. As I run it, you can see that right here in the second entry of the list, or the number 1 index, you can see that it slid Christopher in there, and then it put the other entries. It didn't overwrite the first entry with Ty. It just moved him over a little bit. So basically, this is your way. Thank you. This is your way of being able to input things into the middle of a list without losing any information. All right, let's talk about removing elements from a list now. Removing elements from a list is pretty easy. You're going to use the del command, D-E-L. All right, so to do this, I can just press D-E-L and then space, and then I can list out the entry that I want to remove. So let's say I wanted to take out Stanley. I could simply put in student list here, and then I'd put in the 0th entry, which is the first entry. And then once again, I'm going to print that command out just so you can see what that looks like. If I run this, you'll see that right here, Stanley is present. And then right here, from that point on, Stanley has been removed. All right, so that's how you can remove items from a list. Pretty easy, the del command. That's pretty simple. All right, let's go into some more complicated but a little bit more useful at times. There's a method called the pop method. Using the poppin'. All right. The pop method allows you to get your list popping. All you got to do is type in the name of the list, student list, .pop, like so. And what this does is it takes whatever the last entry of your list is, it's going to pop that off the end of the list. You can think of this as drawing a card. If you're playing a game that's like a playing card game and you have something that's on the top of the deck, you could think of that as your whole list. The thing that's on the very end of your deck, if you're thinking about building this as a list, the things on the bottom would be all the entries towards the bottom, and the thing on the very top is the last number of your entry. So if I were to pop something off of the end of a list, that means it's the last entry. So if I say student list pop, and then I print this list, you'll see that the last entry, Rosa here, has been popped off of the end of our list. So student list pop allows you to basically take the last entry of the list and pop it off of the list. Pretty useful to know how to do. But you can also pop items from a specific position. It doesn't have to be the very end. You could pop off any number of the entries that you want. So if I wanted to pop from a specific spot, the way that you would do that is you would simply still list off students, the name of the list, and then .pop. But inside the parameter list right here, this is where you would put the number of the thing that you want to pop. So if I wanted to pop off the second entry here, that would be the number 1, right? Because we count up from 0. So if I wanted to take Ty out of this list, I could simply put student list pop 1. And then if I print out that student list again, you'll see that that will take out that 1 entry. So there you go. This is kind of a way to delete in a way, if you want to think of it that way, but really, oftentimes, you're going to use the pop command to take an item out of a list, and usually you do something with it right after. So if you wanted to think of it as a playing card game, if you're recreating a game of Uno, digital Uno, you can make it to where when you pop off that list, the item that it pops off could be a reverse card, or it could be a draw 2 or whatever. It could potentially be used. So you're not just deleting it. Oftentimes when you're popping things, you're actually going to use them at that point in time. All right, so this is really all you need to know for now to be able to do our next assignments. We're going to create a student list of all the different students that are in the class, and then we're going to create a random number generator so we can just choose anybody that's in the class at any given time. So that's what I'm going to be working on this list. For now, I hope you enjoy coding with this project. This should arm you with everything that you need to do the first project in our lists. I hope you enjoy, and happy coding.